I found my wife's location by accident because our phone bill sent me a fraud alert at 11:43 p.m. And the first thing I saw when I opened the app was her device sitting across town in a hotel parking garage while she was supposedly spending the night at her sister's place. I remember staring at that glowing blue dot so long my eyes watered, trying to force my brain to come up with some normal explanation, some stupid technical glitch, anything that didn't sound like my whole life cracking open in real time. But then my phone buzzed with a text from her that said, "Long night here. Megan's a mess. I'll call you in the morning." And I actually laughed out loud because it was such a clean lie, so smooth, so casual, like she'd told it 100 times before and never once expected me to see through it. We had been married 9 years, together for 13, the kind of couple people called solid because we hosted holidays, paid our bills on time, and knew how to smile in photos without looking fake. But for the last 2 months, she'd been different in ways that were small enough to defend and sharp enough to cut me anyway. She started sleeping with her phone under her pillow, turning it face down whenever I walked into a room, taking late gym classes in lipstick she never wore for me. And every time I asked what was going on, she'd give me that exhausted superior look and say, "You really need to stop inventing problems, Ryan. Not everything is about you." She was so calm when she said it that I started hating myself for noticing things. I started apologizing for my own instincts. I started wondering if being suspicious made me weak. Then 3 days ago, I reached for her tablet to check a recipe, and a message banner slid across the screen before she snatched it away. I only caught 5 words, but 5 was enough. "Can't stop thinking about last..." She smiled after that, actually smiled, and said, "It's from Claire. We were talking about her vacation. Why are you acting weird?" Then she kissed my cheek like I was a child she'd just distracted from a tantrum, and I stood there feeling humiliated in my own kitchen. So I drove to the hotel. I wish I could tell you I thought it through, but I was halfway there before I even realized I was still wearing my work boots, still had drywall dust on my jeans, still had our wedding ring pressing into the steering wheel every time I tightened my grip. Her car was there, backed into a corner spot on level 3, and seeing it felt worse than any text or theory because it was physical, undeniable. Her actual car, the one with our kid's soccer sticker on the rear window and the dent I paid to fix last winter. I just sat there listening to my own breathing until a man in a gray coat walked past me toward the elevator, laughing into his phone, and I saw my wife step out from behind a concrete pillar and touch his arm like she belonged there with him. She looked straight at him, smiling the way she used to smile at me before our marriage turned into schedules and excuses, and those cold little sighs that made me feel like a burden in my own house. And then she said something I couldn't hear. He leaned down. She didn't step back. My hand was already on the door handle when my phone lit up again with a name I trusted more than almost anyone in my life, and the message on the screen made my stomach drop so hard I thought I might be sick. "Don't go up there, please. Let me explain first." I froze with my hand on the door, staring at that message like it had just reached through the screen and grabbed me by the throat, because the name attached to it wasn't random or distant. It was someone who had been in my house, someone who had sat at my table, someone who had listened to me talk about my marriage like it meant something real. And for a second, I actually looked around the parking garage like maybe they were watching me, like maybe this whole thing had been unfolding longer than I understood, and I was the last one to realize it. I read the message again, slower this time. "Don't go up there. Please. Let me explain first." And my first instinct wasn't anger. It was confusion so sharp it almost felt like panic. Because explain what exactly? Explain how my wife ended up in a hotel with another man. Explain why you even know I'm here. Explain how deep this actually goes. I stepped out of the truck anyway, because whatever that message meant, it didn't change what I had just seen with my own eyes, and I could feel my heartbeat in my ears as I moved toward the elevator, every step heavier than the last, like my body was trying to slow me down before I did something I couldn't undo. My phone buzzed again before I reached the doors. Another message, longer this time. "Ryan, listen to me. You're not seeing what you think you're seeing. Just wait. Please, I'm begging you." That word begging made something twist in my chest, because it didn't sound like concern for me. It sounded like fear of being exposed, like whatever was happening upstairs wasn't just about her anymore. It was about them, plural. A situation big enough that someone else felt the need to step in before I walked straight into it. I hit the elevator button anyway, pressing it harder than necessary, watching the numbers crawl down from the upper floors while my reflection stared back at me in the metal doors, looking like a stranger who hadn't slept in days. And I kept hearing her voice in my head from earlier that night, calm and dismissive. "I'll be at Megan's, don't wait up." The same tone she used when she told me I was overthinking, when she told me I was imagining things, when she made me feel like I was the one slowly losing control of reality. I realized then that this wasn't just about catching her in a lie anymore. It was about every moment leading up to this. Every time she rewrote the truth until I doubted myself. Every time she turned my questions into accusations against me. The elevator dinged and the doors slid open, and just as I stepped inside, my phone rang. Not a text this time, an actual call, that same name flashing across the screen, and I hesitated for a split second before answering because something deep in my gut told me that whatever they were about to say was going to make this worse, not better. I lifted the phone slowly, pressing it to my ear, and before I could even speak, their voice came through, tight, urgent, almost shaking. "Ryan, if you go up there right now, you're going to walk into something you don't understand yet, and once you see it, there's no coming back from it." I stood there inside the elevator with the doors still open, phone pressed to my ear, and something about the way they said it made my chest tighten, not because it sounded like a warning for me, but because it sounded like damage control for them, like I was about to interrupt something carefully constructed and fragile. And I said quietly, "Then start explaining." Because at that point I didn't care if it hurt. I didn't care if it shattered whatever version of my life I'd been holding on to. I just needed the truth to stop slipping through my hands. There was a pause on the line, the kind that stretches just long enough to tell you someone is choosing their words carefully. And then they said, "It didn't start the way you think, and it's not just her." And that sentence hit me harder than anything I'd seen so far because it immediately made everything bigger, messier. Like this wasn't just one bad decision or one secret meeting. It was something layered, something that had been building behind my back while I was still showing up every day thinking I was part of a marriage that actually existed. I felt my grip tighten on the phone as I asked, "Who else?" And my voice didn't even sound like mine anymore. It sounded hollow, like it was echoing from somewhere deeper than anger. They exhaled slowly and said, "Ryan, you need to understand that she's been telling people things about you, about your marriage, things that aren't true." And for a second I almost lost my balance because that was the part I hadn't prepared for. Not just betrayal, but narrative. A version of me that existed in other people's minds that I had no control over, and I pictured her sitting across from someone, maybe that man, maybe others, telling them I was distant or cold, or failing her in ways that justified whatever she was doing right now. I said, "What kind of things?" And there was another pause, heavier this time, before they answered, "That you don't touch her anymore, that you barely notice her, that she feels invisible with you." And I actually laughed under my breath because it was so twisted, so backwards from the reality I'd been living where I was the one reaching out, asking questions, trying to fix something she kept insisting wasn't broken. The elevator doors started to slide shut, but I hit the open button without thinking, keeping myself suspended between going up and staying exactly where I was. And I said, "So she's lying about me to justify this." And they responded quickly, almost defensively, "It's not that simple," which only made my stomach drop further because every time someone says that, it means it's worse than simple. I stepped out of the elevator again, pacing a few steps across the concrete floor, trying to steady myself, and I asked, "Then what am I walking into?" And this time when they answered, their voice dropped low, like they were afraid of even saying it out loud. "You're not just catching her with someone," they said. "You're walking into something that's been planned, and you're a part of it whether you know it or not." I stopped moving completely, the words settling over me like cold water. And I felt this creeping realization start to take hold. That whatever was waiting behind that hotel room door wasn't just going to break me emotionally. It was going to change how I saw everything leading up to this moment. Every argument, every excuse, every look she gave me that I couldn't quite read, and I swallowed hard before asking the only thing that made sense anymore. What did she plan? I stood there in that parking garage, phone pressed to my ear, feeling like the ground had shifted under me. And when I asked, "What did she plan?" my voice came out quieter than I expected, like some part of me already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. They didn't respond right away. Just this heavy silence that stretched long enough to make my chest tighten. And then finally they said, "She didn't expect you to find out like this." Which wasn't an answer. Not really. It was a deflection, and it made something sharp rise in me because I was done being managed, done being handled like I couldn't take the truth. I leaned against the cold concrete pillar and said, "Stop talking around it. Just say it." And I could hear them breathing on the other end. Uneven, like they were weighing how much to admit. And then they said something that made everything in me go still. "She's been building a case against you," they said. And for a second I didn't even understand what that meant. The words felt out of place in the middle of all this, like they belonged in a courtroom, not in a parking garage where my wife was 10 floors above me with another man. "A case?" I repeated, my mind scrambling to catch up, and they rushed to explain, "Not officially, not yet, but she's been documenting things, saving messages, twisting situations, making it look like you're unstable, like you're controlling, like she's been trying to leave and you won't let her." And I actually felt my stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with jealousy or betrayal anymore. This was something colder, more calculated. And I thought back to every argument we'd had recently. Every time she'd pushed me just a little further. Every time she'd said something that felt designed to get a reaction out of me. I rubbed my face with one hand, trying to process it, and said, "So what? This?" I gestured vaguely, even though they couldn't see me. "This hotel thing is part of that?" And they hesitated before answering, which told me more than their words did. "It's not supposed to look like cheating," they said carefully. "It's supposed to look like she's scared of you, like she had to meet someone in secret because she didn't feel safe at home." And I actually let out this disbelieving breath because it was so far from reality it almost sounded absurd. Except suddenly it wasn't. Not when I replayed the last few weeks and saw how easily moments could be reframed, how a raised voice during an argument could become intimidation, how frustration could be turned into something darker. "And the guy?" I asked, my voice tightening again. "Who is he?" And there was another pause. Shorter this time, like they'd already crossed a line and there was no point holding back anymore. "He's not random," they said. "He knows what's going on. He's helping her." And that was the moment something inside me shifted from confusion into something colder, more focused, because this wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was strategy. This was two people standing 10 floors above me, rewriting my life while I was still trying to understand what was real. I pushed off the pillar and looked back toward the elevator, my reflection faint in the metal doors, and I said, "Why are you telling me this?" Because that part didn't make sense, not yet, not when they'd been silent long enough for this to even exist. Their answer came quickly this time, almost too quickly. "Because it's gone too far," they said. "And because you're about to walk into a situation where anything you do can be used against you." And I clenched my jaw, feeling anger rise again. But it was different now, more controlled, more dangerous. My hand hovered over the elevator button again as I asked one last question, the one that had been building in the back of my mind since that first message came through. "How do you know all this?" I said, my voice low, steady, and there was a pause, longer than any before it. The kind that tells you the next words are going to change everything again. When they finally spoke, it came out almost like a confession. "Because I was there when she planned it." I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until a car pulled into the garage and the headlights snapped me back into my body. But even then I couldn't move, couldn't speak, because those words just kept echoing in my head. I was there when she planned it, and it felt like everything inside me tilted sideways all at once, like I'd been trying to solve the wrong problem this entire time while something much bigger had been unfolding right in front of me. I finally forced out, "You were there?" And my voice sounded thin, like it didn't belong to someone who was standing 10 floors below his wife in a hotel with another man. They didn't deny it, didn't try to soften it, just said quietly, "She talked about leaving you weeks ago, but not cleanly, not the way most people do it." And I closed my eyes because I already knew what that meant before they even said it. This wasn't about ending a marriage. It was about controlling how that ending looked. Who got blamed, who got sympathy, who walked away intact while the other one got buried under a version of events they couldn't prove wrong. "She said you were getting harder to deal with," they continued. "That you were watching her, questioning her, making her feel trapped." And I actually shook my head even though they couldn't see me, because every one of those things had only started after she changed, after she gave me a reason to question anything at all. "And you just sat there and listened to that?" I asked, and there was something sharper in my voice now, something that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with them, because trust doesn't break all at once. It fractures in layers, and I could feel another crack forming right there in that moment. They hesitated before answering. At first I thought she was venting. People exaggerate when they're upset, and I let out a bitter breath because that word exaggerate felt like a joke now, like calling a fire a little warm, and I said, "And then what?" because I needed to hear how far it went, how deep this thing actually ran. "She started talking about documenting things," they admitted, their voice lower now, like they were ashamed of even being part of the conversation. "Saving your texts, recording arguments, setting up situations where you'd react." And I felt my stomach twist because suddenly those moments I couldn't quite place made sense. The way she'd push a conversation just a little further than necessary. The way she'd stay unnaturally calm while I got frustrated. Like she was waiting for something, capturing something. "And the guy upstairs?" I asked, forcing the words out. And this time, they didn't hesitate. "He's someone she met through a friend," they said. But he agreed to help her make it look believable, like she needed someone to confide in, someone to protect her. And I leaned back against the pillar again, staring at nothing, because that meant what I'd seen wasn't even spontaneous. It wasn't some emotional mistake or moment of weakness. It was staged, rehearsed, designed to create a narrative where I wasn't just the husband who got cheated on. I was the problem she had to escape from. "And you helped her plan that?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but heavier, and there was a long silence before they answered. The kind that says the truth is worse than anything you're hoping for. "I didn't think she'd actually go through with it," they said finally. And I let out a hollow laugh because that excuse felt so small compared to what I was standing in the middle of. "But you were there," I said. "You heard it, you knew." And they didn't argue that. My phone felt heavier in my hand as I looked back at the elevator, at the numbers blinking above the doors, and for the first time since this started, I wasn't thinking about catching her anymore. I was thinking about what walking into that room would actually mean, how every word, every reaction could be twisted into something else, something permanent. I swallowed hard and asked, "So what happens if I go up there?" And their answer came immediately this time, no hesitation, no pause. "She's ready for you." The way they said it made my skin crawl. Not loud, not dramatic, just flat and certain. Like this had already been decided somewhere above me. Like I wasn't about to walk into a confrontation, but into something rehearsed. Something waiting for me to step into it and play my part without even realizing it. I stared at the elevator doors, my reflection staring back at me like a warning I didn't want to listen to. And I asked, "What does that even mean? She's ready for me?" Because I needed them to say it out loud, to stop hiding behind half answers. "She expects you to find out," they said quietly, and that hit differently, sharper, because it meant this wasn't a mistake or a slip. It was accounted for, anticipated, and suddenly every second I'd spent thinking I was one step ahead felt stupid, like I'd been following a path she already mapped out. "She told me if you ever showed up, she'd know exactly how to handle it," they added, and I felt something in my chest tighten so hard it almost hurt, because I could hear her voice saying that. Calm, confident, already framing the story before it even happened. I ran a hand through my hair and started pacing again, slower this time, more controlled, trying to think past the anger, past the instinct to just go upstairs and force the truth out of her. Because now it wasn't just about truth. It was about evidence, about perception, about whatever version of me she was already building in other people's minds. "So what? She wants me to lose it?" I asked, and they didn't hesitate. "Yes," they said. "She needs you to react, to raise your voice, to get angry enough that it justifies everything she's been saying." And I actually stopped walking because hearing it said that clearly stripped away any doubt I had left. Images started flashing through my head. Arguments we'd had where she stayed eerily calm while I got frustrated. Moments where she'd repeat something under her breath like she was making sure it was heard clearly. And I felt sick realizing how easily those could be twisted, clipped, replayed in a way that made me look like someone I wasn't. "Is she recording?" I asked, my voice lower now, more focused, and there was a slight hesitation before they answered. "I don't know for sure tonight, but she has before." And that was enough. More than enough. I looked up at the ceiling like I could somehow see through 10 floors of concrete and glass to where she was. To the room where she was probably sitting with that same calm expression, waiting for me to walk in and confirm every story she'd already told about me. And for the first time since this started, I felt something shift inside me. Not less pain, not less anger, but something colder, more deliberate. "Why are you really telling me this now?" I asked again. Because that question still hadn't settled right. And this time when they answered, there was something raw in their voice. "Because I didn't think she'd go this far," they said. "And because if you walk in there the way you are right now, you're going to lose everything." And I clenched my jaw, because that word everything suddenly felt heavier than just a marriage. It felt like reputation, like credibility, like the kind of damage you don't fix by telling your side of the story after the fact. I stepped toward the elevator again, but slower this time. Thinking, calculating, trying to see the situation the way she saw it, as something to be controlled, shaped. And I said, "Then tell me how she thinks this ends. Because if she had a plan, I needed to understand the ending she was expecting." There was a pause, and when they finally answered, their voice dropped even lower. "She thinks you're going to give her exactly what she needs, and she's already told people what you're going to do." I felt something cold settle in my chest when they said that, like a switch flipping from chaos into clarity, because suddenly this wasn't just emotional anymore. It was structured, pre-written, and I was walking into a role she had already assigned me. "What did she tell them?" I asked, my voice steady in a way it hadn't been before. And there was a hesitation, not because they didn't know, but because saying it out loud made it real in a way that couldn't be undone. "She said if you ever found out, you'd show up angry," they admitted. "That you'd corner her, that you'd lose control, that she was scared of that happening." And I let out a slow breath through my nose because it was almost impressive how clean it was, how believable, how it took just enough truth, my frustration, my questions, my reactions, and twisted it into something darker, something that could be packaged and handed to anyone willing to listen. "And the guy?" I asked, already knowing the answer before they said it. "He's there to witness it," they said quietly, "to back her up, to make it real." And that was the moment I understood how deep this went, because it wasn't just about what happened between us anymore. It was about proof, about having someone else confirm the version of events she'd already started spreading. I rubbed my jaw, staring at the elevator again, imagining the room upstairs, how it was probably arranged, how she was probably positioned, calm, composed, ready to react in just the right way the second I walked in. "And you?" I asked, because I couldn't let that part go, not yet. "Where do you fit into all this?" And this time the silence on the other end felt heavier than anything before it, like whatever answer was coming was the one they'd been avoiding the most. "I was supposed to stay out of it," they said finally. "Just listen, give advice when she needed it." And I nodded slowly, even though they couldn't see me, because that sounded exactly like the kind of role she would give someone, close enough to help, far enough to deny involvement. "But you didn't stay out of it," I said, and they didn't argue, didn't deflect this time, just exhaled like they'd been holding it in too long. "No," they admitted, "because this isn't just about her leaving you anymore. She wants to make sure you can't come back from it." And that sentence landed heavier than anything else, because leaving is one thing, but destroying someone on the way out, making sure their side never gets believed, that's something else entirely. I looked down at my phone, my grip tightening slightly, and I said, "So if I go up there and do exactly what she expects, she wins?" And they answered immediately, "Yes." No hesitation, no doubt, just a simple truth that cut through everything else. I nodded again, more to myself than to them, and for the first time since I pulled into this garage, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was thinking, actually thinking about what she didn't expect, what she hadn't planned for. My thumb hovered over the elevator button, but I didn't press it yet, because there was still one piece missing, one thing I needed to understand before I made a move that could change everything. "What is she saying I'm going to do?" I asked, my voice low, controlled. And there was a pause, shorter this time, like they knew there was no point holding it back anymore. When they answered, it felt like the final piece sliding into place. "She told them you'd get violent." I didn't feel anger when they said it, not the kind I expected anyway. It was something colder, heavier, like a door quietly closing inside me as everything finally made sense in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. "Violent," I repeated under my breath, and I could almost hear her saying it to someone else. Calm, composed, maybe even a little afraid, painting me into something I didn't recognize but could easily be made to look real if the right moment was captured the right way. I leaned back against the pillar again and closed my eyes for a second, not to calm down, but to think clearly for the first time since this started, because now I understood the rules of the situation. And more importantly, I understood that she thought I didn't. "She's already decided how this ends," I said quietly, more to myself than to them. And they didn't interrupt, didn't try to soften it, because there was nothing left to soften. I opened my eyes and looked at the elevator again, but this time it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a stage, like something set up for a performance she expected me to walk into without thinking. And I realized that the only way she wins is if I give her exactly what she's waiting for. If I go up there angry, if I raise my voice, if I give her anything she can twist. I trailed off, and they finished it for me. Then she gets everything she planned for. I nodded slowly, my jaw tightening, because the worst part wasn't even the betrayal anymore. It was how carefully she'd constructed this, how she'd turned me into a character in a story I didn't agree to be part of. "She thinks she knows me," I said, almost under my breath. And that thought sat wrong with me in a way I couldn't ignore, because maybe she did know the version of me that would have walked into that room 10 minutes ago, the one driven by anger and hurt and the need for answers. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. Not after this. My grip on the phone loosened slightly as I exhaled, slower this time, more controlled, and I said, "Then I'm not giving her that." Because it wasn't just a decision. It was the only move I had left that she hadn't already accounted for. There was a small shift on the other end of the line, like they hadn't expected that answer, like they'd been bracing for something else, and they said cautiously, "Ryan, what are you going to do?" And I let out a quiet breath, staring at the elevator doors like they were something completely different now. "I'm still going up there," I said, and I could feel my heart steadying instead of racing, which should have scared me but didn't. Not anymore. But I'm not walking into her version of this. And for the first time since I got that alert on my phone, I felt something that wasn't confusion or anger or humiliation. It was control. Fragile, but real. I stepped forward and pressed the elevator button, watching the numbers light up again as it started to come down, and I added quietly, "I just need to know one last thing, because there was still one piece that hadn't settled right. One detail that kept circling back in my head no matter how much everything else clicked into place." When you said you were there, I asked, my voice steady, where exactly were you? The silence on the other end this time wasn't hesitation. It was dread. And when they finally answered, my stomach dropped all over again. I'm in the room with her right now.